see here, we are Unleashed. We're based in sunny Perth. And our mission there really is to have a large-scale impact, a billion lives through better training and learning. So there's lots of training. Organisations spend a lot of money, as you're all well aware of on training and learning. But how much of it is effective, and how effective is it? So that's really the mission here for us, is to provide better training that's more affordable, can reach more people. So you're really democratising learning a lot more as well within an organisation. Some of our clients previously on the right there, you can see, and also some of our partners. So we're an Oculus independent software partner, and yeah, that's probably about the bulk of it there. So look, as we go through, any questions, as Ben said, just pop them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them. Cool. All right. So VR basics. Right. So what we've got here. Are you good, Ben? Or?
Yep. I can jump in now. Sorry about that, everyone.
Okay. All right. I'll hand over to you. I'll just turn my video off and mute myself.
Okay. Sure.
Cool.
All right. Excellent. Yeah. So firstly, we wanted to delve into briefly, our perspective of where VR sits in the overall training market. We over the past 5 years, we've probably talked to a few hundred trainers and learning development professionals. And what they tell us about life coaching and training is that it's very impactful and effective, but the cost of providing subject matter experts to trainees, in particular remote trainees, can be incredibly expensive and typically one-off experiences. These typically don't have the impact that you would otherwise like to have for long-term skills development. On the other hand, you have e-learning and video conferencing. So these digital technologies provide a lot more scalability and affordability, but they don't actually require people to put their skills and knowledge into relevant practice. So their overall effect is somewhat lacking. So VR can really play quite a significant role in this landscape. However, the cost of custom software development for VR can be prohibitive for a lot of people, a lot of organizations. So it doesn't have the effect it could otherwise have. And also, we often hear that VR training can sit somewhat siloed within an organization. So rather than, say, a simulation or a piece of content that could have a universal application across an organization, it might sit on a single headset in one part of an organization. So that's a general background to why we believe that what is actually needed for successful application of the technology across widespread organizations and trainees is platforms to actually underpin the scalability of using this technology. So when you're ready, Tessa, next slide. Thanks, yeah. But Philip will go into far more detail the actual position that platforms play in a holistic approach to using VR for training. So next slide, thanks. So we just wanted to actually ask everyone, what level of experience do you have using VR for training or just generally? So we've got a poll question that we wanted to ask at this point. So I'm just going to, there we go. We've got John there saying none. So now I'm regaining my controls because I've actually logged in. Tessa, are you able to launch that poll there? Oh, there we go. Okay, so yeah, everyone, if you can reply, oh, there we go. We've got a heap of results already coming through. So it looks like We'll give it a few more seconds. Looks like the majority of people actually haven't tried the technology. Yeah, about 28% are saying that, there you go, 31% they plan to implement it in their business, which is fantastic. And a number, yeah, saying that they actually work in the industry. Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay. There we go. So we will quickly go through what these technologies actually are, just to make sure everyone's on a sort of even playing field going forward for the rest of the discussion. So VR essentially removes you completely from your real world surrounds. So what that can actually do is you put a headset on and you're essentially looking at a virtual space, completely removed from seeing anything else within your real environment. So augmented reality is quite different. You can use, say, for example, your mobile phone and look through it, and you're actually displaying virtual graphics over the real world. So the best example, obviously, of that is Pokemon Go. But then taking that the next step further is mixed reality. So what mixed reality essentially does actually spatially tracks your real world environment as well. So I could actually have my mobile phone here, and then if I'm looking around it with a headset on, I'm actually looking at it from different angles. So it's placing graphics within and interacting with your real world surrounds. Next, next slide. Thanks, Tessa. Okay, so we wanted to briefly touch on what are the different degrees of freedom with VR. So this slide is actually becoming increasingly obsolete almost. And we really think that the reason for that is the technology is just moving so quickly that basically 3 degrees of freedom headsets are almost totally redundant. But anyway, we'll give it a bit of a quick explanation. So 3 DOF, or degrees of freedom, means that the headset users' rotation is tracked. However, their position actually isn't. So for example, it allows you to look left and right, up and down. But as soon as you move either forward or back or side to side, you don't actually move within the content. And this can actually cause a bit of a disconnect between your brain and what it expects and what your eyes are perceiving. It can lead to levels of nausea. So 6 degrees of freedom, 6 DOF, on the other hand, allows you to move freely within your virtual world. So this can be incredibly powerful and critical for computer graphics-based training content, where a trainee needs to interact with virtual objects and a virtual space to perform tasks. Yeah, so the reason I said this is becoming increasingly irrelevant is that 3 DOF headsets are pretty much all but discontinued. In our opinion, it's largely due to the rise and affordability of exceptional 6 DOF standalone headsets, and also people really working out the limitations with 3 DOF as well. So next slide, thanks, Tessa. So now we'll delve into what are really the core components to scaling VR training across an organization. So next slide, thanks. So firstly, we want to highlight one thing. Implementing VR training requires an element of change management within an organization. So in order to prepare yourself for successfully introducing any change to an organization, you really need to get buy-in from the key stakeholders. So we highly recommend engaging, the ICT, the business operations, and the training departments. So ICT, your technology teams there need to understand how VR will integrate into your existing systems. They will also be very eager to understand what ongoing role they will have in managing headsets, because chances are that they're not fulfilling that role at the moment. So it might actually increase their workload, which can be a little bit off-putting at times for them. So in relation to the business and your operations, it's critical to have really typically the main beneficiaries of the VR initiative involved from day one. So if you can get their buy-in early when you're piloting VR to validate the potential improvements in workers' performance and try and validate a strong ROI, it will make life a lot easier to obtain budget for when you want to make further investments into the technology beyond your first steps. And so finally, it really goes without saying how critical it is to align VR training initiatives to your organization's most critical capability needs. So in the training department, we really recommend involving frontline trainers from day one, as they may be the people that are doing the hard yards, introducing headsets and content to workers going forward. So next slide. Thanks, Tessa. So really based on our 5 years experience in this industry, lots of interviews and discussions with trainers, L&D professionals, we believe that these 3 core components are really needed to successfully implement and scale VR training to achieve the phenomenal ROI potential that this technology has. So, well, most obvious, you need appropriate headsets to access the content. Second, you need well-crafted VR training content. And then third, you need a platform to administer trainees and monitor their performance, distribute, and sometimes even create content through. So I'll start with the delivery devices. Thanks, Tessa. And then pass over to Philip to go over the next 2 parts. Oh, it looks like we've got a question. So previously is an example of MR the cube. Not actually sure what the cube is, sorry. But yeah, Brad, if that's you, yeah, please follow up with the question via email later on. We're happy to discuss that further. Okay, so the headset types. I actually want to throw this out to the audience, and feel free to add this into the chat. But we're really keen to understand what kind of headsets your organizations are using or planning on using. Across these 3 areas of PC-based, standalone, mobile-based. As I go and explain them, feel free to add in the chat. What you're currently using or planning on using, and even if you know the brand as well, it would be really interesting just to hear which technologies you're currently using. So at a high level, there are 3 types of VR headsets. So the first is PC-based. These headsets run through high-powered gaming PCs, and they provide really exceptional experiences and quality graphics. They do come at additional cost of a gaming PC, which can be $3,000 to $4,000 thereabouts. But they also can add a little bit more complexity. For example, some of them require wires. You can remove them with additional add-ons, and some have external tracking stations. They're really best suited for training experiences that require the absolute highest level of graphics realism and tracking precision. As an example, surgical training, or sometimes they're fantastic for use with accessories to add value to the training experience. And a really good example of that is the new Vive facial trackers that were announced a week or 2 ago. They've got significant use for facial tracking in interpersonal skills training. So next is the standalone headsets. These devices include the processor actually built into them, and they don't need a computer or a mobile phone to run them. The 6 degrees of freedom version of these devices, they've really only been in the market around 2 years, but they're already incredibly popular for consumer and workplace use. The fact that they are easily portable in a small carry bag to different locations, which is very handy for remote workers, and they provide a high quality experience at a good price. It's hard to see them really not representing the bulk of the headset market within a reasonably short period of time, in our opinion at least. So I'll just note quickly at this point that the difference in price with the PC-based and the standalone headset ranges is largely due to whether you choose a consumer headset or an enterprise headset. So HTC, Oculus, Pico, just as examples, they have their own enterprise offerings that include, really quite an impressive range of support. So dedicated headsets for enterprise use, enterprise operating systems, extended warranties, priority support, and remote mass device management as well. So for large-scale deployments of headsets to remote sites, we highly recommend enterprise gear. So the final category includes mobile-based headsets. So, this category really shot to stardom with Google Cardboard about 7 years ago now. However, they provide really low levels of immersion, usually only 3 DoF experiences as well. You can get 6 DoF, but typically it's 3 DoF, and really poor standardization due to varying phone capabilities. So as such, this range is already pretty much obsolete. So I noticed we've got some questions coming through. So what is the real impact to the learner between PC-based versus standalone? Why couldn't surgeons use a standalone at the moment? Is there a noticeable loss of degrees of freedom, for example? Thanks, Toby, for that question. It's a really good one. It's not so much that there's a loss of degrees of freedom. It's more how realistic and how high fidelity do you need the visuals as part of that training experience. And with something like surgery, because the level of accuracy that needs to be there, both in what you're seeing and what you're doing, needs to be so high. It can mean that the either the standalone headset doesn't have the processing power to show that level of graphics, or it doesn't currently have the capability on things like hand tracking to represent that level of fidelity that you would otherwise get from a PC-based headset. So hopefully that answers your question. So Tessa, on to the next slide. Thanks. So these are just some technology option considerations that we've come up with. So firstly, each headset and device type has pros and cons. So it's almost worth scenario planning to determine what option best suits your needs and trying these different devices where you can. So as much as possible, think about the content and platform that you want to use and which devices they are going to be compatible with as well. Consider whether your devices will be centrally located or deployed remotely. And also, how many you might need, as this will have significant bearing on whether you need devices that operate with mass and remote management, and also how portable your devices need to be. When choosing your headsets, think about your organization's needs both today and as much as you can in the next year or so. And ask yourself, does it make sense to buy a lot of headsets today, or are you better off starting small with a small number, testing how appropriate they are for your organization, and incrementally purchasing to avoid technology redundancy as well, because headsets, maybe every other year are being updated as well. Also, a bit of a non-intuitive question to ask yourself is whether it makes sense to have a mix of VR headset and computer-based training. So this may be relevant to run CGI simulations and 360 experiences on computers or tablets. And the main reason to do this is to boost accessibility of that content that you've got to remote workers, because it's not always going to be possible to get headsets out to everyone. And then finally, we always recommend that you try a headset personally to see what it can do, how it feels, how it works, before you really expect your trainees to give it a go and accept it. Yeah, so on to Philip to talk about content.
Yeah,
Thanks.
great. Thanks, Ben. Awesome. So delivery devices done. So I'll have a look at content and platform. All right, so let's get into it. Next slide, please, Tessa. Thank you. Okay, so here's a broad overview of the content types. You'll probably be familiar with some of them. So let me just talk briefly through them, and then we'll have another quick poll to see what people are actually doing out there. So from the left, simulations, this is the big ticket item. This is the nice shiny stuff that you probably see at demos and expos and stuff. So essentially computer generated imagery, so you can create anything, any world, any environment, any interaction that you want. Very high fidelity, or can be very high fidelity, doesn't have to be. Probably the most time consuming and the most expensive of all the ones here in terms of content as well. So with these ones, just to maybe caveat this a little bit, no one of these content types is better. So don't think of it in terms of everyone. You have to have a simulation for everything, and everything is second best. You really must start, as you would know as L&D and training people, you must always start with what's the learning outcome we're trying to achieve? What's the behavior change we're trying to achieve? Are we trying to shift someone's perspective, or are we just trying to, you know, communicate a simple procedural change in a procedure that's been done, you know, one way for many years, but now it has to be done differently. They're very different things that you're trying to achieve from a learning point of view. So always start with that. Don't start with the content or the hardware or anything else for that matter. Always start with a learning objective, and that will obviously drive the types of content that you need. So simulation is certainly a very good one. The next one over, 360 based content. So there's a number of flavors here. You can have videos. So, or just to take a step back, just to explain it a little bit more, 360-degree video and imagery is essentially when you put the headset on, you can look around and up and down, and the image is obviously all around you as opposed to just coming at you from the screen. So you can have videos where there's motion, obviously, and sound, and you can just have still images as well. Very powerful for communicating motion and locational experiences, so inductions and situational awareness scenarios, where if that's your learning objective, they're generally the most powerful ones to do that, because it is photorealistic. A good quality 360 will be more realistic than a simulation can ever be, because it will still be CGI, or at least for the near future. A whole lot cheaper and faster than simulations to create as well. The next one along is interactive 360. So this is essentially a step up from your 360 image or video by adding overlays over it. So you'll have hotspots that you can click on, and a little icon text box might pop up and might tell you what that object is that you're looking at. It might ask you a question, or it might actually play a little video showing, you know, for a fire extinguisher, for example, it might pop up with a little 2D video within the 360 video showing you this is how you use, you know, this type of fire extinguisher, for example. So you're value adding the 360 image or the 360 video with those elements. There's also the option to create simulations or scenarios, like choose your own adventure style, with a set of 360 images or videos. So you can play a short video, say customer service interaction, customer comes in, he's in your face, he's like, oh, this doesn't work, I want a refund, I'm angry, and the video stops, and the user's presented with a choice of what do you say next, what do you do next, and depending on what they pick, it will play the appropriate outcome video, if you like, for that scenario. So again, very realistic, very powerful way of connecting choice. So it's like it's basically giving the user immediate feedback, as you can do with a simulation as well, but this is another way to achieve that with 360. And then on the right, we have the 2D content. So we can have some PDFs, regular 2D videos that we're all familiar with from e-learning. You can bring that stuff into certain VR training platforms as well. And so you'll be in your headset, and you'll be probably in a virtual training room, and you'll be looking at a screen, and it will just be like sitting in a room watching a PowerPoint, but only in VR. So that can be useful just to provide some, you know, maybe background information to contextualize the simulation or the 360 video a little bit more. And the last one is virtual collaboration. So not offered by all platforms and all hardware, certainly, but some of them will offer a way to bring people together. So in maybe just trainees together to discuss what their experience has been, or you bring a facilitator in to actually lead a full lesson in VR. So again, you might be in a virtual training room that might look very similar to a real one, with a screen and seats, and people can sit around and everyone's represented by some sort of avatar, and they can talk in real-time audio. So again, it's slightly different flavour, but also quite powerful if you have a large distributed workforce. So just quickly pause there, and maybe we can get the poll question out, Tessa. That would be great. Yep. Cool. So this is really just looking at the types of content you're using. Right now, I can't see the results of this, can I? So did you jump in on that one, Ben? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I can update. Yep. Yep. They're coming through.
I'll give it another minute.
Sure.
Yeah. So just with the content, it's really, I just want to reiterate. Start with the learning objective and also the budget in mind. Oftentimes, simulation can be quite costly, and you might walk away from the technology thinking this is not for us. But if you have a sit down and do a bit of a discovery around the learning objective, you might find that a set of 360 images might work not as well as a simulation, but still more than what you're currently doing, which may be an e-learning module, for example. So just keep that in mind. I think that's the key takeaway for content. So how are we looking?
Yeah, good. So
here we go. Excellent. I can see that.
You got that there? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, right. So it is mainly simulations. Very good. Closely followed by 360 and then the 2D. So that's very interesting. If there's any questions off the back of this stuff, just fling them through as we go. I think we'll keep trekking along for time's sake. So we've got some examples to show you of these types of content. So let's go into that right now. So what have we got? Here we go. Here is an example of an interactive 360 video. This is the workshop. You can see those hotspots that are on there. The user's clicking on them. It's showing them different areas of the workshop here. So this is an induction use case. You can also do teleporting within that, where the user can walk around, as it were, not walk around, sort of teleport around the site. So you can get a good sense of that one there. So the main use cases here would probably be induction. So we're very interested in the locational experience. So people need to know where the exit is, where this is, where that is, where not to go. Saves a lot of cost and time. So especially if you have to, your only other alternative is to do these in person, where you have to send people to the site and take time out to actually do this. You can give people a really good experience before they arrive somewhere. Also look at technical skills as well. So you can capture an SME doing a task in 360-degree video, and you can capture their procedure and the tasks they're doing, the actions they're taking in quite high fidelity, and you can recreate that 1,000 times. So an employee who's learning a new task can look at that over and over again. You can show things from different angles, and you're only really needing to capture it once, as opposed to having to take that SME offline to provide coaching as well. Safety as well, that's an obvious one that we always get asked for a lot. So again, along with the locational stuff, you can highlight key safety areas, the fire extinguishers, the first aid kits, all those sorts of basic things. You can also look at hazard identification in the workplace as well. And an interesting spin on this one could be, that's probably quite topical nowadays, is psychosocial hazards. So coming off, arguably coming off the back of the COVID pandemic, there's a lot of emphasis on mental health everywhere, but certainly in the workplace as well. So how do you spot a hazard like a psychosocial hazard in a workplace? Like, this is very different to, there's a cord laying along the ground and someone's going to trip over that. So you're looking at the way people are communicating with each other and body language and those sorts of things. So that's where the 360 can also be used to quite a lot more. I mean, I don't want to say it's better than simulation in some senses. Simulation can do that as well, soft skills, but quite a lot more involved than, for example, shooting a 360. Cool. Have we got any questions that are coming through? Okay, what have we got here? So I'll just quickly take a moment to have a look at that. So what does it really impact the learning between PC-based? Fidelity video content, smartphones sufficient? Yeah, another question from Toby. So the question was, what hardware would you recommend to capture high fidelity video content? And is a smartphone sufficient for this type of example? So I'll start with the last one first. So is a smartphone sufficient for this type of example? I assume you're referring to mobile-based VR, where you put your phone in and you're looking at it. Probably not is my answer. I mean, yes, it will work and it will show a video, but the user experience of mobile-based VR is, from our experience, quite poor. So there's a much higher incidence of nausea and those sorts of things, and you've got the light coming in from underneath, depending whether you've got a cardboard or a slightly better plastic version of it. So the immersion is lost. The experience is certainly not what it would expect. So I would say no, it's not sufficient. I would say at a minimum you're looking at something like a Oculus Go for if you're just doing video content. I think that would be sufficient. But again, that's not the 6 degrees of freedom, so that's one to keep in mind. Ideally, you'd sort of look at Quest upwards. Hardware to capture high fidelity video. So what you saw there was captured on a consumer grade 360 degree camera. I think it was a Garmin Verb. Get them at JB Hi-Fi in Australia for, I think they're a retail around about $1,000. So not a lot of money. The quality on that, as you can see, is it's a bit hard on the screen, but in VR it's certainly more than adequate for a training scenario. So we don't really have any specific recommendations around that, but suffice to say, you don't need a $20,000 360 camera to record this type of stuff. Yeah, so I hope that answers the question. Otherwise, send through more. Okay, next bit of content, Tessa, if we can have a look at the next one. Okay. Yeah, we'll go into the medical simulation. So this is a simulation, as you can see. The user's making a choice here. In front of them is, you can't hear the audio, sorry, but in front of them is quite an angry customer at a hospital who's demanding to see an inpatient, his girlfriend, but he's not allowed for certain reasons. So you can see there that's CGI environment, quite realistic. Yeah, you can keep playing, Tessa. Thanks. This is another one. There's a customer handing back a device that's faulty. You're in training here and you're consulting with your colleague over here, and she's going to tell you what's wrong with it, and then you have to decide what you say to the customer. And again, depending on what you say, you can program in the simulation for the customer to react in a certain way and to say certain things. So you can see the realism can be quite good. You can obviously go a lot more high fidelity than this in the simulation, but it's still not the same as that photorealism that you get with 360, certainly. So some of the main use cases, benefits we see here really are technical skills. So we were able to simulate what's, I guess, too expensive, too dangerous, or impossible even to create in real life, and therefore you can't film it either if it's too dangerous or impossible. So essentially you'd be saving costs by doing that way. Safety procedures as well. Again, what's impossible, dangerous or expensive to recreate scenarios you can do in simulations. And lastly, soft skills is also an application that has been used, but it's probably a little bit more niche. Certainly possible, but I'd recommend that 360 is probably the easier way to do that. Okay, so I need to pick up the pace a little bit here. Okay, next bit of content is the live training space. So here we've got a video. You can see here there's a facilitator up the front. There's a screen there, and they're presenting some content. You've got your attendees here that you can see, and you're in that environment, as I was saying before, and you can have a traditional classroom environment just recreated virtually. Here we have a role play scenario where the person there was talking to the nurse behind the counter, and both the nurse and the person playing the role play are two separate people anywhere in the world, connected via the platform to have a role play. So instead of having a real life role play where two people, have that awkward sort of face to face, you can do that virtually, and you can customize the environment around it and the noises and stuff. So there's some other options as well that you can use. Cool. Considerations. So as I mentioned, start with what you're trying to achieve first. Don't put the shiny stuff first and say, oh, we want a simulation. It may not be the most appropriate, or certainly not the most cost-effective way to do it. Self-authoring versus custom. So give some thought to whether you need to, as an organisation, be able to do this yourself, you want to do it, or whether you're always happy to go to an agency to do that for you. There are obviously pros and cons, you can imagine, with everything. And that leads into the next point, which is content agility. So what I mean by that is the flexibility that's required of your content. So if you have a procedure or a training objective that changes a lot, or the procedure around that changes a lot, then you need a lot of agility in the content, in that you need to be able to change it a little bit over time. Simulations are a little bit brittle in that sense. Once they're created, then you'd have to go back to the developer to put in changes. It doesn't have to be time consuming, but it can certainly be. With 360 video, it may be a little bit easier. If you're doing it yourself, especially, you can just shoot another video or another image, essentially. So ask yourself, how flexible do I need my content to be? Lastly, off-the-shelf options. So probably not a lot out there at the moment, but it's certainly something that's growing. So more and more we'll see off-the-shelf entire packages, so simulations or 360 based training lessons put together for a specific thing, probably generic organizational things, generic safety things, manual handling, those sorts of things. So that may in time become a bit of an option. At the moment it's fairly limited. Cool. Right, let's keep going. Tessa, go to the next slide. We got a poll, have we? Oh, sorry, we do have a poll. Yeah, can we send that one out? So yeah, let's do that one. So we should. Yeah, cool. So we'll won't spend too long on this one. I think we'll want to get to the platform, and then we want to have a bit of a chat with Nikita, who's been waiting patiently for us, and answer some questions. So what have we got through there, Ben?
There you go. There are the results. Can you see that?
Okay, yep, that's coming through. Yep. Yeah, so technical skills and safety hazard identification coming out equal top, closely followed by induction. Yeah, that reflects what we've certainly experienced in the marketplace. Again, it probably comes down to, especially for safety, comes down to the ability that you don't have to put people in difficult situations, unsafe situations. You don't even have to take that risk. And in some instances, you can simulate things that would be impossible to. Yeah, okay. So no big surprises there. Great, thank you for that. All right, so the last part of the three is the platform. We've done the delivery devices, the headset. I've talked about the content, and now the platform. So let's have a dive into that. Here's an example of one, and this is the Facilitate platform. And essentially, maybe I'll just take a quick step back. So why do I need a platform? So it's not strictly necessary, but it's certainly fast becoming standard for a number of good reasons. So one of those really is just the ability to manage at a large scale the content, the learners, and in some part the data that comes out of it, the analytic data. So there's a whole other webinar on that alone, but there, as you can imagine, using VR and being able to measure, we were able to measure a lot more around the pedagogy that's happening, the psychology that's happening of people as they're learning, and we're able to understand a lot more about that. So that's a lot of data. The question is, where does that go? If it's sitting on a headset somewhere that's not connected to anything and not to your LMS or your LRS, you're kind of losing a bit of that. So there's sort of the main reasons. So I'll just quickly talk through this diagram conceptually. So for our platform, Facilitate, you've got the starting on the left, you've got the content. So you can create that yourself and import it. You can get us to help you with that, or you can get a partner, a videographer or a simulation designer to create that for you. You bring it into the design phase. So this is where you're able to combine different types of content. So that's another distinct power of a platform. You can have a 360 video to show, say, a situational, for some situational awareness, some location-based background, and then you can go into a simulation for something very specific. You might come back out and just finish with 1 or 2 slides around some procedure and policy, and you can do that. Those different types of content, you can pull them all together into seamless lessons. You have the user management option as well. So as for all LMSs, you'd be familiar with that. You have your ability to track users, who did what when, you know, how long did they take it? Did they look at the content? Did they enjoy it? Is another big one of being asked for some feedback, because VR is new. A lot of people are a bit hesitant in their organization to see what, you know, what people's responses are. You're able to deploy the training. So another big benefit of some platforms is you can have a desktop version, so people can consume this very same lesson either in VR, or they can do it on their computer as well. It's obviously in a 2D format, you lose some of the immersion, but it's still an option. So if people don't have access to the headset, they can do that. And lastly, measurement, so we can capture, yeah, as I said, who did what when and how well, and any sort of assessments you put in, feeding back straight back into your LMS via API. So you've got a seamless integration of data. So that's an example of how a platform would work. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just briefly talk about some of the considerations. The simplicity or complexity of your VR training. If you've just got one simple procedure that's not going to change, and only a handful of people within the organization in one location need to do that, then you probably don't need a platform. You can put that content on those headsets, put the headsets in a room, people sign in and they say they've done the training, and that's it. And that's perfectly fine. However, once you want to start scaling it, and or you've got people in different locations, and you need to make sure that all the headsets have the latest lesson, or something's changed, you need to push that out seamlessly. You want your L&D team to do that from one central location. That's when you're going to need a platform. So it really does depend on what your training objectives are there. And as I mentioned there, the dispersed or centralized workforce. Certainly the flexibility of using the different mediums. So the mediums are simulation, 360, 2D discussion, you know, a virtual training room with discussions. Where you need that flexibility, then again, you're going to need a platform to be able to pull those together in a seamless manner. And the last one is obviously the data capture. So as I mentioned, this is going to expand very rapidly in the near future, because we're able to capture some very meaningful learning related data, but it's useless if it's just on a headset somewhere. It needs to be connected to your HR stack, tech stack already, as you've got, so your LRS or your LMS. So there's some of the considerations of a platform. Cool. Let's keep tracking. So I just want to briefly talk about some of the mechanisms underlying VR. So yep, we can go next slide. So we've heard that VR is more powerful than e-learning and in-person in some senses. And here's just a little bit of why that might be. So if we start at the top line, we've got the ability with VR to provide greater contextual information and contextual cues. So if I put you in a 360 environment showing you a work site, a video is playing and people are moving around doing stuff, there's a really, really strong richness of contextual information there. You know, you've got someone over there who's doing some sort of thing, you know, he's moving really fast, he's moving really slow. You know, it's nighttime or it's daytime, or there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of dust. You can do all that instantly by capturing that in a totally immersive manner in the video, as opposed to having to provide all that contextual information. The reason this is important, because it's very important to adult learning to have context around the actual fact. Meaningful interactions. So you're able to, as I said, with these simulations, people can have cause and effect. They can do something and they'll see some sort of response to that. It's much more meaningful than just answering a question and not getting any feedback. And the realism and the novelty factor. Certainly decreased distractions. If you have a headset on, it's very difficult to look at your phone. The outcome of that is that the learning impact is basically improved, because there's more contextualized learning. There's more of an emotional connection with the content. So it's very visually and auditorily, it's very real. So again, you're more likely to feel connected to the content, and we know from psychology that's very important for retention. Is that the content, that you emotionally connect with the content in some way. And the last one, then the business retention, the business impact, really. Obviously, what we're looking for, greater retention rates and greater generalizability of learning. So again, with that contextual information, people can translate the specific task to different scenario, to different contexts more easily than in some of the other modalities. Cool. Decreased learning time and cost, obviously, they're the big ones as well that go along with that. Okay, so I think we will move on. So the next slide really is not a slide at all. It's actually a conversation with Nikita. So I'll let Nikita introduce herself. I think there she is. So very briefly, Pacific National, one of our customers, and Nikita there has been using Facilitate, our platform, to do a little bit of training. So maybe if you give us a real brief introduction, and then we've got some questions for you, Nikita, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Philip, just checking you can hear my audio okay?
I can, yep.
Awesome, cool. Hey, everyone, and thanks for joining and sticking right to the end of the presentation. So I'm Nikita. I work at Pacific National, so one of Australia's leading rail logistics companies. At PN at the moment, I'm looking after training, design and delivery, but previously was quite specifically in a digital learning role. So I was very lucky to have quite a specific role looking at what we can do digitally across the learning space, and obviously that's become a lot more exciting in the past few years, and has led me to start working with the Unleashed team.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so a couple of questions then. So what are the training challenges that you're overcoming with VR? Why are you using VR?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, I think a lot of the challenges that we have are very similar to a lot of organisations. We're time poor, we're resource poor when it comes to both people having access to learners and also budgets. They're some of our key challenges. We also have a very dispersed learner and employee footprint. We're right across Australia, but also in a lot of regional areas as well. We're a highly safety-driven organisation, but do a lot of work that can be in unsafe environments if work's not done the right way. So that will be our key considerations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So why using VR? Why not use a more established training medium to solve some of these challenges?
Yeah, very good question. So particularly in the industry that we're working in at the moment, we have done a lot of traditional training where we're doing face-to-face, either out in the field or classroom style training. If I'm looking at the operations employees or our learner group more specifically, that's the style that they're used to. They're an older demographic, on average between 40 and 60 years old, generally male, and haven't actually had a lot of experience with technology. So you would think, why on earth would you then jump to VR? Why not do e-learn training? So for that particular operations group, sitting at a computer and even just logging on, remembering your email address, and then going through an e-learn can feel quite mundane no matter how good the e-learn is. And we find that their level of attention and engagement is really quite low. So one of the key reasons that we've looked at VR is because of the engagement. It is literally inescapable unless you take your headset off. You can't escape the content. So for us, that was something that we were really excited by. And we also wanted to do something to really shape up the learning in a way that was going to be fun, and also be able to start capturing the attention of the next generation of learners that we're conscious are going to be coming through the business as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely. No, that's fantastic. I mean, the next question was going to be why do you believe that VR is the most suitable solution? But I think you've probably largely spoken to that already. Is there anything else around there that you might want to add?
Yeah, I think in terms of VR being suitable, I know you spoke a lot around data previously, and I saw a couple of questions come up in terms of integration with the learning management system. So that's certainly something that we are doing with the Unleashed team. Which is great. And obviously looking into the future, we're really excited to see what other data and analytics we can pull from the type of training. Obviously safety related, things like being able to gauge where the learner's eye is looking is quite critical. So that is great for us. And then anything where we can try and make repetitive opportunities feel less repetitive for someone. So that kind of gamification feeling is also something that we've been drawn to with VR.
Yeah, no, absolutely fantastic. Okay, cool. And what are the important considerations for you in determining your VR solutions?
Yeah, so we did quite an extensive RFP when we were looking at different VR solutions, and for us, there were a number of things. So I'll just go through my top list. One was, can we create our own content? And I know that this is a broader chat around VR, but in particular, what we liked about the Facilitate platform was we could create our content the same way we create our content now, whether it be shooting a video, creating a PowerPoint, or pulling together a script for some role plays. So what we really liked is that this wasn't too dissimilar from real face-to-face training. It was just done differently. The cost was another big one. We've seen everything from $50 million platforms to something that is a lot more achievable in the realms of, say, $30,000 and more comparable to the development of an e-learn. So user cost is really important. The startup time frame as well is huge. A lot of the businesses that we've spoken to, it was going to be minimum 3 to 6 months before we had an MVP out. And with a pretty large financial risk associated to that as well. And I think even though we have some comparable industries that are using virtual reality, until you start, you don't know how it's going to go.
Absolutely.
You can do all of the preparation in the world, but really a low-cost startup pilot where you can manage your own content and have control of that is important. And then I would also say hardware support. So really excited that in particular Unleashed is starting to work with HTC. That's great. Having that capability to use multiple different hardware pieces is important, and you guys touched on that before as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I think just to quickly pull out that point, the low risk entry point, that sort of, what Nikita was alluding to is probably an interesting one, isn't it? Is something for everyone to keep an eye on. If you're talking to vendors, is look for someone who will give you that opportunity to try something, because it is very new. There is a lot of risk. You'll have a lot of internal pushback, no doubt. So look for something where you can get a quick win and can do so in a low risk way. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah. So the next question: what are some of the key things you thought were important? When making decisions about those three components, so the headset, the content, the platform. So just briefly, maybe on each, what were some of the key things that were important for you?
Yeah, so when thinking about the headsets, for us, it really was around who our audience was and how easy the headset was going to be to set up. We have very specific internal IT considerations as well. So headset security, so that mobile device management piece was important. And obviously, as you mentioned before, just trying to look at longevity out of the device. So and the user experience within that device as well. So obviously, you can go for a tethered option, which is going to give great graphics and maybe a better visual user experience, but a lot more costs involved, a lot more of an arduous setup to think about there, and maybe not supported by all platforms. So they're probably our main hardware considerations. In terms of the platform, as I said, we went through an extensive RFP process. I think the biggest thing for us when we're looking at the platform is currently I'm still seeing in the industry there are a lot of people that have created a VR product that are great at the technical components, but they're not great at the end user experience when it comes to real life industry take up. You'll sit with them and they'll ask you, well, what do you want to do? And that's a really hard question to answer when you've never used VR before.
Absolutely.
So particularly what I like about your team is that, you've got the psychologist on board, you've obviously got the technical experts, and then you also have that L&D experience as well. And I think that makes a really great team when it comes to thinking about what you want to do, how to embed it in that whole change management piece as well. So the advice there is have a look at the whole team that's supporting the product, not just the product.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. Cool. And then the last one really, is there any other advice that you'd have for organisations looking to start exploring VR for training?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were asked 2 years ago by our executive team, what do we do within VR? And our question back to them was why VR and how do we think it should work? We then partnered very closely with the business and the SMEs. I think that there's a lot of fear around VR replacing people, and what we've been looking at VR for is just how can we do things better? Obviously, if we can do them quicker and we can save money, that's a major advantage as well. But how can we do what we do but do it better? So really think about your user case, and VR has endless possibilities, but my advice is to try and hone in on 1 or 2 very specific user cases and just really drive those. We chose to look at something operational and something that was a soft skill, so that we could also capture both ends, and we can pigeonhole ourselves if one thing didn't look to get the uplift that we wanted. I'd also look at what you really can do feasibly from a change management perspective, and really look at your rollout program and how that might look, to the extent where if you build this out and if it is really successful, what's the team that you need to support that? And is the business on board with giving you that resource? You said some really good things earlier in terms of your business case and your return on investment. I'd strongly recommend looking at that as well within what you're doing. And I mean, it is generally new technology for a lot of businesses, so some things are going to be your best guess. But if you can get the budget to do a small scale pilot and have the right people involved in that are your SMEs and your change makers, then that'll definitely make a big difference.
Yeah, fantastic. Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Nikita. That's really great. I think we were definitely over time, so I think we'll leave that there. Nikita, thank you.
That's fine.
And I think Ben, if you've got some final thoughts, and
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Nikita, and thanks, Philip. So we've probably got a bit over 5 minutes left of content, so yeah, bear with us if you can. Thanks, Tessa. So yeah, in our wrap up, we really wanted to go over some of what we've seen as the most common characteristics of organizations that have been successfully adopting VR for training. So this list is nowhere near exhaustive, but it's what we've witnessed, a number of times. So a bit of a common theme with these points. So firstly, typically organizations using the technology have larger workforces of, say, at least 1,000 workers. And the rationale for that is the more workers that are there, the more cost to provide quality training, and also the greater the room for variability in training standards. So VR can help bridge those gaps. Second, we often see organizations that have dispersed frontline workers using the technology. So reason being the greater the distances between operations, the more cost involved in providing experience-based training. So if you think, flights, accommodation, sending SMEs to operations, etc. Third, we've seen a strong relationship to immersive training use and alignment with organizational strategy, such as digitization, or the view that market-leading training is crucial to organizational competitiveness. Fourth, often, but not always the case, organizations leading the charge of a high consequence of error. So for example, in medicine, military, foreign emergency services, mining, etc. And there's a real clear reason to minimize the margin for error by investing in the most effective means for knowledge retention and skills development possible in our view. That's why VR is there. So next, running a proportionately large percentage of face-to-face SME-led instruction is another characteristic we often see. So these heavy costs of bringing the SME in and the travel expense of that, etc., can be the reason why organizations explore this technology in the first place. How can they replicate those experiences virtually, using simulation, or as Philip was saying, 360 learning and interactions, etc. And finally, we found a reasonable correlation between organizations using VR training and shift work, of all things. So shift work in their operations. So the nature of rolling and changing schedules makes it, many times over more difficult to line up the availability of SMEs with trainees. So they look for ways that they can actually replicate that experience using VR. So next slide, please, Tessa. So just quickly, some very high-level key takeaways. Firstly, where VR is today, technology's ROI is easiest to prove for dangerous, expensive, or difficult to replicate training. By no means should or will VR be limited to these areas, but they are the best bet for early stage investments where the business case still needs to be validated. Next, as discussed, for long-term sustainable and scalable use of the technology in your organization, you need quality hardware, well-designed content, and a platform to manage and deploy it through. Thirdly, start with the training objectives in mind and make decisions from there. Your project stands a far greater chance of success if you begin by using VR for the right reasons where it should be used. And we really recommend going through a discovery phase to determine the answers of whether to use VR for your training needs, and if so, how to go about it. And then lastly, we recommend walking before you run. As Nikita was saying, start small with a pilot project. And one of your key goals really should be in that pilot to work out, what worked and what didn't, what headsets did you use, and how well were they appropriate or not? What was the impact of the content, and what administrative type functionality do you need to take your journey further? And we also recommend, as was discussed as well, if you don't have immersive technology SMEs in your organization, work with a trusted advisor that is dedicated to this space and has your best interests and the technology's best interest in mind. So that's the key takeaways. And the final slide is just a thank you to everyone. Quick request again, if you can throw in any ideas for future topics that you'd like us to cover, please throw them into the chat right now. You know, we're really keen to hear your opinions on what's of interest and what you're struggling with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so everyone, thank you for joining us again. And a big thank you again to Nikita, you know, for your really valuable insights into the discussion. If you'd like to learn more about VR training or facilitate, please reach out to us. And the recording will be made available to everyone here and everyone that registered. So have a great day, and stay tuned for our next webinar. We're tentatively looking at the beginning of May for that one. So, yep. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Cheers.
See ya.
See ya.